This video is strictly for educational and documentary purposes. It contains no ideology or propaganda. Hell on a volcanic island. February 1945. The Pacific Ocean. The U.S. Navy surrounds a tiny patch of land, just over 8 square miles, Iwo Jima. At first glance, just another barren volcanic island. But beneath its black pumice and toxic sand lay one of the deadliest traps of World War II. Within weeks, nearly 7,000 Americans would die here. Over 20,000 would be wounded. Out of 22,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1,000 would survive. It wasn't just a slaughter, it was a slaughter by design. Why Iwo Jima mattered. To this day, many still ask, why did the U.S. need this desolate chunk of lava? The answer lies in the skies. Since 1944, American B-29 bombers had begun striking the Japanese mainland, but their route from the Marianas took them directly over Iwo Jima. The Japanese had fortified the island with radar and fighter aircraft, intercepting the bombers. Worse, their planes could reach and strike the U.S. air bases on Saipan. The conclusion was clear. Iwo Jima had to be taken, no matter the cost. Engineering death. The Japanese commander, General Kuribayashi, knew he couldn't repel the invasion, but he could ensure that victory would come at an unbearable price. He ordered no defenses along the beaches. Instead, he built a city beneath the ground, a literal underground fortress. Over 11 miles of tunnels carved into the island, bunkers, supply rooms, command centers, everything connected, everything hidden. Each pillbox protected by 2 others, every position reinforced with concrete and basalt. Some could absorb direct hits from 500-pound bombs. Naval shelling? Ineffective. These positions were dug so deep, ship artillery couldn't reach them. February 19th, the invasion begins. At dawn on February 19, 1945, the U.S. Marines launched their assault. 5 Marine divisions, over 70,000 troops. For 3 days prior, warships and bombers had pounded the island. Over 8,000 tons of ordnance dropped. So when the Marines landed, they expected little resistance. But silence can be deceptive. They stepped onto the volcanic beach, and hell erupted. Sand that kills. One of the deadliest enemies wasn't gunfire. It was the island itself. Volcanic ash doesn't hold weight. It collapses. It swallows you. You can't run. You can't dig. Foxholes cave in instantly. Every step forward was a crawl. Then came the gunfire. Hidden pillboxes, invisible slits in rock walls, underground traps. Machine guns tore into the advancing lines. Mortars and artillery created overlapping kill zones. Snipers picked off commanders. Entire squads fell before reaching their first cover. Mount Suribachi. At the island's southern end rose Mount Suribachi, just 546 feet high. But it was the key. Whoever held the summit controlled the southern front. The assault lasted 5 brutal days. Combat was hand-to-hand. Inside the mountain lay a honeycomb of tunnels and ambush points. Every door hid a trap. When Marines raised the American flag on February 23rd, a moment immortalized in history, the battle was far from over. It was merely one scene in a larger tragedy. Flamethrowers and tanks. Flamethrowers played a devastating role on Iwo Jima. Marines carried M2-2 backpack flamethrowers. Shermans were modified with POACWSH-5 flamethrowers. They incinerated everything, tunnel entrances, pillboxes, trenches. But this tactic came with a price. Flamethrower operators were prime targets. They were the first to fall. According to some estimates, up to 94% of flamethrower crews were killed in action. They carried fuel tanks on their backs. One bullet, and they became human torches. It was one of the deadliest roles in the war. Yet without fire, the bunkers wouldn't fall. The toll. Official U.S. losses: 6,821 killed, over 19,000 wounded. Japanese casualties: near total annihilation. Of the 22,000 troops defending the island, only 216 surrendered. The rest died or chose suicide over capture. The battle was so intense, so costly, that it remains the bloodiest in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps. Every inch of ground was paid in blood. And all for an island that, within a year, had lost its military relevance. But in 1945, it meant everything. The fortress beneath. When U.S. Marines landed on Iwo Jima, they quickly realized this wasn't just an island, it was a fortress. Beneath the volcanic soil, the Japanese had carved over 18 kilometers of tunnels, a web of bunkers, ammo depots, command centers, and gun emplacements. Entrances were nearly invisible, concealed in the ashen hillsides. This wasn't a conventional defense, it was a phantom stronghold. Japanese troops would vanish underground. One second you saw them, the next, they were gone. But they weren't far. They heard you breathing. They waited for you to come closer. American soldiers called it the Ghost War. General Kuribayashi. The mind behind this was a man the Americans underestimated at first, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. He had studied in the U.S., understood the American way of war, and knew how to counter it. He banned his troops from suicidal banzai charges. He refused to waste their lives. Instead, he ordered them to fight underground, to the last bullet, the last breath. When asked how long his garrison could hold, he replied, 100 days, if we're lucky. Over 21,000 Japanese soldiers were stationed on Iwo Jima. Most of them knew they would never leave. American strategy. The U.S. prepared for the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific to date. Over 500 warships, 70,000 Marines, thousands of tons of ordnance. Before landing, they bombarded the island for 3 days, 8 million kilograms of explosives. They believed nothing could survive. But as the first Marines hit the beach, gunfire erupted instantly. The Japanese had survived, and they were waiting, hidden in stone. Fire came from 3 directions, precise, relentless, cold. On the first day alone, the U.S. suffered over 2,400 casualties. The ash that kills. Iwo Jima wasn't like the beaches Marines had trained for. The volcanic ash was soft and unstable. It swallowed boots. Digging a foxhole was nearly impossible. Climbing slopes felt like sinking in quicksand. There were no natural defenses. Bullets came from nowhere. Shells exploded from unseen bunkers. Everything was under crossfire. Many Marines said it felt like being targets on a shooting range. And yet, they had to move forward, no matter what. Psychological hell. There was no clear front line on Iwo Jima. The enemy could be behind you, beneath you, just meters away, and you might never know. The fear never stopped. By day, ambushes. By night, silent infiltrations, grenades in tents, blades to throats. Sergeant Tom Weller wrote, "I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid death would come while I was asleep." Minds began to break. Some Marines went mad. Others stepped into the line of fire, just to end it. Losses and the grinding advance. Each week, American forces pushed forward, inch by inch, at the cost of hundreds of lives per day. In just 1 week, nearly 7,000 Americans were killed, over 20,000 wounded. Japanese losses were smaller, but each death was a warrior who fought to the bitter end. Kuribayashi's final orders were brutal. You may not die until you take at least 10 enemies with you. And his soldiers obeyed. Statistically, each Japanese fighter inflicted an average of 5 to 7 American casualties before being killed. The Siege of Suribachi. The southern tip of Iwo Jima was dominated by Mount Suribachi, only 166 meters high. but symbolically, it was everything. Capturing the summit meant controlling the southern coast. Fighting for Suribachi lasted 5 days. Inside the mountain was a maze, tunnels, supply caches, gun nests, each cave a death trap. Marines clawed their way up, literally tearing rock from rock. On February 23rd, a scout platoon from the 5th Division raised the American flag at the peak. The photo by Joe Rosenthal became iconic, but what few remember, Suribachi wasn't the end. It was only a chapter. The battle for the island had only just begun. The cost of victory. By the 6th week of the battle, American forces controlled most of the island, but the Japanese were still fighting, underground, in isolated units, with no communication, no hope. General Kuribayashi was killed in action. To this day, his body has never been found. He vanished the same way he lived, quietly, in the shadows. Only 216 Japanese soldiers were taken prisoner. Out of over 21,000, that wasn't an error. It was doctrine. To them, surrender meant dishonor. Death was the only way. Iwo Jima's legacy. The Battle of Iwo Jima would become one of the bloodiest in American history. Over 26,000 casualties, nearly 7,000 killed. It was the first battle where the attacking force suffered more losses than the defenders. But the island was taken. The U.S. built an airfield there, and from that airfield, later missions would launch, carrying atomic bombs. Iwo Jima became a stepping stone to the end of the war, but at what cost? The final stronghold. February was ending, but the fight wasn't. U.S. Marines had secured the South, captured Airfield No. 1, raised the flag atop Suribachi, but the fiercest battle was still ahead. The northern half of the island was a fortress of caves, bunkers, and tunnels. This was Kuribayashi's last stand. Resistance grew more savage. Every meter was paid for in blood. Japanese forces didn't just hold their ground, they counterattacked, without warning, with brutality, to the last man. Psychological hell. Marines no longer spoke of victory, they spoke of surviving until nightfall. Everything was ash and dust. The smell of burning flesh and cordite hung in the air. The ground shook from constant bombardment. At night, phantoms crept from the tunnels. In close quarters, commands were lost. Only screams, and the silence that followed. Conditions were infernal. Scorching heat by day, freezing cold by night. Little water, wounded left behind, bodies left unburied. Letters home spoke of madness. "I don't think I'll be the same man after this," wrote one Marine. Kuribayashi's strategy? No banzai charges, no senseless death. Kuribayashi imposed deep defense tactics. He told his men, exhaust them, bleed them, break their will. His goal was not victory, it was to make the price unbearable, and he succeeded. Losses and numbers. Official records: over 6,800 Americans killed, around 20,000 wounded. The deadliest battle in U.S. Marine Corps history, more than 300 killed per square kilometer. The Japanese? Almost complete annihilation. Fewer than 1,000 of 21,000 survived. But Kuribayashi achieved his grim objective. He made the enemy pay dearly. A victory without triumph. March 26, 1945. Iwo Jima was officially declared secured, yet pockets of resistance continued for weeks. Kuribayashi vanished, his body never found. Some say he died in a final counterattack, sword in hand. Others believe he took his own life in a hidden bunker. His strategy, though, entered military history, a lesson in tactical genius, and a warning. Was it worth it? Iwo Jima became a crucial airbase. B-29s launched from here to bomb mainland Japan. Crippled planes returning from missions landed safely on its runways. More than 2,400 bombers found refuge here. From a military standpoint, the mission succeeded. From a human one, it was carnage. Memory. In 1945, no one knew that the photograph of the flag atop Suribachi would become iconic. No one knew the names of the men lying beneath it. But now we do. Iwo Jima is not just a name, it is a memory of the price that is paid when diplomacy fails and men become weapons. Let those who never returned live on, not only in stone and grave, but in us.